Here we are at the MyGuru homepage because the first thing I want to show everybody as part of this video is just how to find the pre-ACT 10 practice exams, at least as of summer 2025. Of course, this is always subject to change, but we're going to just search for pre-ACT practice test. And then right now, the third item in the list is actually where I want to go. I need to avoid the free ACT practice tests and prep because that's going to take me to the official ACT practice exams, not the pre-ACT practice exams. Instead, I'm going to go to this wisconsin.gov homepage. I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to select online practice test here. And just for future reference, if you're watching this video and unable to locate the practice exams using what I just did, this is the current URL for the practice pre-ACTs. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, I don't have a username or password. That's true, but you don't need one. We just have to click practice tests here, and you'll get access to the pre-ACT practice exams that are available online for everyone to use. Now we're going to click pre-ACT 10 to access the English test for pre-ACT 10. Now, you have some options here. I'm going to generally recommend that if you have not engaged with your own practice test of pre-ACT 10 English from this page, you go ahead and do that right now. Take your diagnostic before watching these explanations. We're going to work through this in full, and you want to compare what I am going to explain in this video against your own results to get the most out of that diagnostic exam that exists. You can also take it untimed or with any of these accommodations selected, but that should only be done if you have specific cause to do so. For everyone else, you'll simply want to take the timed English test here, as I'm going to do now. Once we click that, you'll see that it says there are 3 sections. There aren't really 3 sections. There are 2 introductory slides just kind of explaining the interface, and then there are 48 questions in the 3rd section, which is really the only section with practice problems. You can enter your name if you're so inclined, but I'm just going to leave it as guest and hit start. Now, on the introductory slides, things aren't timed. You just have as much time as you'd like to familiarize yourself with the interface. And you can see this is a time practice test. You're going to want to pace yourself. You're going to have to read things carefully. There's not a whole lot that you need to do with this introductory slide. But we will note that you've got a review button up here that will show you all of the questions of the section once we get there. And if I let that little drop down go away for a moment, well, hopefully it does. There it goes. You can also bookmark things for review later on. So now that we've read this, we'll just hit next. We'll hit submit, even though there weren't any actual questions answered. We're going to have the exit warning. We'll just keep on moving. And then we get the introductory slide for the English section. So we've got the multiple choice test about the English section. You will be able to write things on a piece of paper to self-score at the end, but you'll also see a score, a result page at the end that will engage before finishing off this video. Once again, you've got the review button up here, you've got the bookmark button, but we're going to just click next. We'll hit submit. Of course, we are fine leaving the section, so we'll hit yes. Now, as soon as you hit start on this slide, the timer will begin and you will have 35 minutes to complete 4 passages of roughly 12 questions each for a total of 48 questions. So it's a pretty quick pace. I'm going to go ahead and hit start. And you see the timer's already going. And I need to first just familiarize myself with a couple of the tools after I click next here. So you've got the passage on the left, and we've got 2 buttons up here. We've got a pointer, which is going to allow us to select answer choices. And if we need to, we could use the answer eliminator to eliminate answer choices. And we're certainly going to want to do that in some instances, but we're going to start with just the pointer. Then we're going to address the questions as we go, depending on whether they're asking about overall contextual questions or about grammar, as this question is. So we just read the first sentence. On the first morning of my New York City vacation, I was awoken by familiar snores in an unfamiliar room. We'll just stop right there and consider this verb of awokened. Hopefully we recognize that awokened is not actually proper English. We can eliminate choice A using that eliminator tool. Awakened, possibly. Certainly not awoked. And awaken is not going to be the proper past tense. We'll go back to the little pointer and we will select choice B and move on to the next question. Now we're going to consider this next grammar question. So you'll want to consider the correct answer that you just used for the prior question to make the first part of this question, the first sentence, more correct. So on the first morning of my New York City vacation, I was awakened by unfamiliar snores in an unfamiliar room. Asleep in the other 6 beds were 2 college students from Mexico, a high school student from the US, a teacher from Canada, an engineer from Sweden, and an architect from Brazil. Okay, we've got a complete sentence before the period, a complete sentence after the period, and we should, if we're familiar with just this idea that you need to have a subject and verb on both sides of a period, be able to select choice A rather proactively. If, however, we have doubts, we can consider the other answer choices and use that eliminator tool. Of course, we would create a run-on if we had no punctuation whatsoever. We're also not going to want to say which asleep because that creates a bracketed comma clause around our main clause in the prior sentence, which we certainly wouldn't want. And again, I was awoken by unfamiliar snores in an unfamiliar room, comma, asleep in the 6 other beds were 2 college students from Mexico. That's going to create a run-on as well. So we've got our correct answer of A, and you probably would have selected it yourself a little while ago. Then we've got the first opportunity to use the hidden highlight tool. So here we're being asked to select the answer choice that introduces the main subject of the essay. So we just got done reading about all of the different students that were there. And we keep reading. I'd gotten to know all of them the night before as we sat up late telling each other about our lives. Over 37 million people visited New York City last year. It's been several years since that night, but I'm still friends with one of the students from Mexico. Well, we're supposed to be talking about this author, not the number of people that visited New York City, so I could use that answer eliminator to get rid of no change. It was the first of my many experiences staying in hostels. Maybe we'll hold on to that. I had never slept more soundly than I did that night. Well, we stayed up late, so we wouldn't have slept soundly. That kind of distracts from the main idea. And this was my first visit to New York City, and I had a difficult time finding the hostel. We're all pro hostel, and we liked all of the friends. So we'll select back the pointer and pick our correct answer of B, move on to the next question. So once again, with the grammar questions, it often can be best to use the little answer eliminator. So it's been several years since that night, but I'm still friends with one of the students from Mexico. On trips to other hostels, comma, I've made more friends. Okay, so on trips to other hostels is a dependent clause. That's just describing when this narrator made more friends. There doesn't seem to be an issue here. But if we switch to when I've made more friends, we create a fragment. On other trips to other hostels during which I've made more friends, something else would have to happen. We'd again create a fragment. On trips to other hostels, comma, and I've made more friends just is not a coherent list. So once again, we'll select our pointer and select no change, move on to the next question. So then we've got another contextual question. Given that all the choices are true, which one most clearly expresses an enthusiasm for and a commitment to hosteling? So we've got to focus on the goal. And we know that once in a while, I cross paths with former hostel roommates. Well, I'm going to go back to my answer eliminator because that doesn't express the enthusiasm sought by this task. Hosteling can be highly unpredictable. That seems a negative, seems like a negative for hosteling, not an enthusiasm for it. Now I wouldn't travel any other way. That seems pretty positive. And then sometimes I can't find solitude in a hostel is going to be a negative negative tone about hostel. So our correct answer is going to be C. We'll move on to the next question. Here, we've got another contextual question asking to consider adding a following statement. So your default here is going to be delete unless you can't make sense of the surrounding narrative without the additional information. In this case, some hostels enforce curfews in order to ensure the safety and comfort of their guests. So we read around that asterisk. Hosteling isn't just friendly, it's inexpensive. Hostels can cost as little as $7 a night in rural areas and just over $30 in some of the largest cities. So why would I be talking about curfews? We're talking about the cost. So we'll pick our answer eliminator, get rid of the options that say yes. Then no, because it portrays hostel rules as unnecessarily restrictive for their guests. No, it's not saying they're restrictive. It's a good idea, apparently, according to this statement. But it does stray from the discussion of how much hostels cost. So we'd select that as our correct answer and move on to the next question. Once again, we've got a grammar situation. So if we read, Hostels can cost as little as $7 a night in rural areas. That's a descriptor in rural areas for a night. We don't want any punctuation coming between a night and its object in rural areas. So we're going to go ahead and select no change. Hopefully you can do this one pretty briskly because you will have to go quickly through this section where it's going to take fewer than a minute or less than a minute for each individual question. Then we've got another true statement that is being considered to add. So hostels aren't fancy, but the beds are comfortable and everything is clean. And we're talking here about you usually sleep in a dorm room and share bathroom facilities. Well, this time, as I highlight the true statement, I might think to myself, this is at least relevant to the surrounding context. And if we were to say no, it's not a description that contradicts details. So we can eliminate choice C using that answer eliminator. And you can see while the eliminator is on, I can't use the highlight tool. But when we do use the highlight tool, it gives us a good reason to eliminate, and it also forces engagement. It also doesn't shift the paragraph's focus from hotels to hostels. So we've got reasons to eliminate both of the no options. It doesn't explain the benefits of sharing facilities, but it does provide examples to illustrate the claim that hostels aren't fancy, so we'd select B and move on to the next question. Here we've got another grammar problem where we'll read, you usually have access to a kitchen, which provides an alternative to costly and expensive restaurant meals. Well, if we've got a bracketed clause, we should be able to remove it and understand the sentence overall. If I just said, you usually have access to a kitchen to costly and expensive restaurant meals, I go, that makes no earthly sense whatsoever. So no change isn't going to be an option. We also know that the alternative to cannot have a comma between it. We've got which provides an alternative to costly and expensive restaurant meals is one clause. So we're not going to want to have the comma after alternative either. Now, it provides an alternative. So we don't want a comma between provides and alternative either. And if we just had no comma, we'd have you usually have access to a kitchen which provides. We need the comma between kitchen and which because you usually have access to a kitchen could stand alone as an independent clause. So we'll select choice C and move on to the next question. Here we've got a question dealing with redundancy. And again, our default is going to be delete. And the reason in this case that we'd want to just delete is we don't need to say costly and expensive. Costly is expensive, so we'd select D. And again, we can speed up a little bit through that problem. Here we've got a specific question task. We're being asked for what is not acceptable. And I want to make sure I identify that clearly. So we don't even need to necessarily read the stuff between the underlined portions that are relevant to this question specifically. We'll just pick up at the beginning of this final paragraph. Hostelers are explorers, and with thousands of hostels around the world, exploring is easier than you might imagine. If you can think of a place you want to go, there's probably a hostel nearby. Though some people don't like hosteling because of the lack of privacy, I consider this characteristic to be its main advantage. Okay, so though works, although will work as well, while will work as well, and so too will even though, since absolutely is not going to work because they are contrasted this first part of the sentence against the second part of the sentence. So since doesn't make sense, we'd select it and move on to the last question of this little passage. And once more, we'll just read the sentence. The communal nature of hosteling has given me the opportunity to meet people of all ages and nationalities who share my philosophy. That is, well, they just share my philosophy. I don't need that is. It's clumsy and it's not going to directly introduce the philosophy of travel independently, live simply, and discover the world, whereas the colon certainly would. We don't need a transition if we use the colon. And philosophy being and philosophy travel independently just doesn't describe that as being the philosophy. So our correct answer is B here, and we'll move on to the next question and see our second passage. So here we're being asked for a contextual question again, so we need the most specific indication of McCreary's early achievement. So we read from the top, by his early 20s, Bear McCreary had already created music for a fair number of films. Okay, so I need this to be specific, and a fair number of films is anything but specific. I don't know what that number is. Same thing with numerous works of in the medium of film. The same thing with films, whereas over 30 independent films is certainly going to be a specific indication. So we'll select choice C and move on to the next question. Here we've got the idea the writer is considering adding the following true statement. A different version of Galactica had aired earlier. Remember, we're defaulting to delete unless we don't understand the paragraph without this information. So picking up where we left off, in 2003, he would begin contributing music to a remake of the 1970s science fiction television series Battlestar Galactica, and in so doing, emerge as one of today's most exciting composers. A different version of Galactica had aired decades earlier. We already said that. It's a remake of the 1970s science fiction television series. So going back to our answer eliminator, we don't want to add. So we'll get rid of A and B. And then no, because the essay focuses on a newer version of Galactica, making a mention of the earlier series irrelevant. No, it's not irrelevant, but it is redundant, which allows us to select the correct answer of D here. We'll then click next and consider this little grammar question. McCreary's work on Galactica is fresh and unconventional with fellow composer. Well, I don't want fellow, composer, Richard Gibbs. That's like 3 different people. So using the answer eliminator, I know I can't have no change. I don't want a comma between composer and Richard Gibbs. We don't want a comma between fellow and composer. We just want to say with fellow composer Richard Gibbs, McCreary helped establish the show's musical style. And so we should be able to select choice D pretty readily here. Then moving on to the next one, once again, we've got to highlight our task because we need to find which of these options is not acceptable. So when Gibbs quit the show, and remember, we can potentially just skip over the stuff in the middle and pick up where the next question is questioning us about. So when Gibbs quit the show, McCreary took over the composing duties. Okay, so took charge of, certainly will work with replacing over. Took out the composing duties, like made them go away. That doesn't make any sense. But took up the composing duties, that would match took over. Took on the composing duties would match took over. And so we select choice B as the one option that would not be acceptable as we move on to the next question. So then, given all the choices that are true, which one most effectively introduces the subject of the paragraph? So I might have to read a little bit further in to understand what the subject of the paragraph is. World music is traditional or folk music usually played by members of a particular culture. Taiko, the duduk, and Irish bagpipes and whistles make appearances in this show, Battlestar Galactica. And so if we're just talking about what world music is, we're not talking about Battlestar Galactica and this fellow McCreary who was the composer. So once again, we'll go back to our answer eliminator, get rid of the no change because that strays from the subject of the paragraph. Choice B, for the series, McCreary uses a wide variety of sounds from around the world. That seems pretty good. A wealth of instruments finds its way into the modern music scene. We're not talking about the whole modern music scene, and we're not simply concerned with what McCreary is interested in. We need it to be related to the series, so we'll once again select our pointer and move on to the next question. Here we can jump ahead and we'll pick up actually in the middle because it's just one sentence, but words chanted in Sanskrit accompany a battle in space, and vocals in Italian, Senegalese, and Latin grace other scenes. McCreary also employs traditional Western orchestral instruments. These can be violins and cellos. Well, that is going to create an independent clause and a run-on, so we don't want no change here, so we'll get rid of that. 2 examples is still going to be a run-on, such as violins and cellos. Okay, that could work. These include creates another run-on, so our correct answer here is going to be choice C. Moving on to the next question. So we pick up in the final paragraph, rather than accompany on-screen action, McCreary's music also illuminates characters and ideas. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with this right now. And it's not in the same way. It's not nonetheless. It's also, I mean, sometimes it's relatively straightforward, I would argue, because we've got the rather, it is going to do this other thing, and it's not a causality, it's not a similarity, it's just an example. So our correct answer has to be A. We don't need to overcomplicate that one. Then the next sentence, we've got to consider tense. Certain themes become associated with particular characters. For example, mournful Celtic music with a father and son. Sometimes the music even seems to shape the visuals that a viewer can see. You can use the surrounding context to identify the tense. And you can even highlight over here. So we see even seems means we need to be in the present. We don't want to go into the past tense. So it's not going to be become. It's not had became. It's not have became. It's just simply the no change become because of the even seems in the following sentence. Use the surrounding context to determine the proper tense. We move on to the next question. So we've got another consideration of changing. We are changing the sentence to an estranged father and son, and we want to determine whether we want to keep it or change to this estranged father and son. We just read certain themes become associated with particular characters. For example, mournful Celtic music with a father and son. You might think to yourself, why is a father and son mournful? But if we add an estranged father and son seeking reconciliation, it makes more sense. So we are going to want to make the revision, not because it contributes to the paragraph's discussion of key scenes from the series, and we can again highlight why we don't not select this one, but because the new version suggests why mournful music is paired with these characters, we'd select B and move on to the next question. Then we've got another issue of redundancy. Sometimes the music even seems to shape the visuals that a viewer can see. Well, that would be from the Department of Redundancy department. We want it to just be, visuals, and we can go pretty briskly through that one. Then we've got the piece Passacaglia, named for a type of composition that consists of variations on the same theme. Well, the piece is this, and it's named. We don't actually have a main verb for this sentence. We need the is named, which is going to be our correct answer, to create an independent clause around that name of Passacaglia. Make sure all of your sentences have both a subject and a verb. So then the last sentence and the last question of this little passage, the result in this episode and others is music that enriches the stories and tells its own artful story as well. Well, there's nothing wrong with this because we can get rid of that dependent clause in the middle. It still makes sense. The result is music that enriches the stories and tells its own artful story as well. We don't want to have an is before an is, so B is out. We don't want to have this long dash by itself, and we do need to bracket that clause. So our correct answer is going to be A, and we move on to the next passage. So here we're being asked, should we add this information? So we're going to have to probably read this full little paragraph. So, each spring, North Atlantic right whales migrate from their winter habitat to their summer feeding grounds around Nova Scotia, Canada. Their route includes the highly industrialized coastline of New England because right whales tend to stay closely to the shore and feed on zooplankton near the water surface. They are at risk of colliding with ships moving along the busy shipping lanes in Massachusetts Bay. Well, adding the information that the winter habitat is in the waters off Georgia and Florida is kind of necessary to understand where they're traveling and getting us back to that coastline of New England. So if we use our answer eliminator, is not creating confusion, and it doesn't blur the focus of the essay. So we get rid of those. But we're not yet talking about near extinction. And it's not tied to Georgia and Florida where the extinction and the problems are occurring. It's happening in New England. So our correct answer is B because we do have a sentence that states the location of their winter and summer habitats, which helps provide context. And we'll move on to the next question. Here we've got, because right whales tend to stay closely, well, we can't say closely. That would be an adverb, and we just need what they stay close to. So D is going to be the correct answer here, just a difference between adjective and adverb. We need that to be an adjective. Then we've got our next question. In the mid-1700s, right whales were hunted to near extinction, and they have yet to relapse. Relapse doesn't make any sense. Recover would, rebuild doesn't, remain doesn't. Sometimes the right word is just the right word, so we'll select choice B and move on to the next question. Then, marine biologists estimate that fewer than 400 North Atlantic right whales exist today. The researchers' aim is to detect the presence of whales in shipping areas where the endangered whales may be. Well, we're trying to detect the presence, so we want to get rid of the redundancies, and choice D is going to allow us to do that. We'll move on to the next question. Then the researchers' aim is to detect the presence of whales in shipping areas. Again, kind of remember what we just did to simplify this. And then quickly alerting, we need to match the verb tense of detect in the other part of this sentence. So we need to alert, use your highlight tool to catch it, but there's our correct verb tense. And once you click next, you'll see that our highlights in the left-hand side actually go away. That's kind of helpful. Then recently, an international energy company and federal regulators have funded a group of scientists from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and Cornell University to design an underwater system to listen for these endangered right whales. So we funded a group of this and that. We don't want commas in between. So we're not going to have scientists from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. That's going to be two different sets. That's not it. Same thing with C. Same thing with D. We don't want to separate the WHOI and Cornell University, so our correct answer is going to be no change. Move on to the next question. Now we're being asked where we should place a highlighted sentence. So we need to come after we introduce the researchers. And the researchers are introduced in sentence 4, so we need the sentence to come after the sentence in yellow to come after sentence 4, and now we can move on to the next question. Then we've got this sentence, and we probably pick up here. I wouldn't keep reading until we need the contextual question that's about to come. Data from the hydrophones are transmitted via the cables to computers that can recognize whale calls. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this, and are transmitted traveling the cables. No, with the cables means they're both being transmitted at the same time, which isn't true, and it's not as. Again, sometimes the right word is just the right word, and we move on to the next question. Then, during the months when right whales are likely to migrate through Massachusetts Bay, if you have a pause, you might think to yourself, I need a comma here. So we'll use our answer eliminator and get rid of the answer choices that don't have a comma. And we've got analysts at a Cornell lab monitor, and we don't want a second comma separating the analysts from the verb of monitor, and our correct answer is indeed choice C. If you have time, you can read your choice back into the sentence to confirm it makes sense, but in the interest of trying to get everything done as I'm saying all of this stuff aloud, we'll go ahead on that problem. So then we've got the essay as a whole. The writer is considering adding this additional sentence to the essay, and we've got to determine where it's going to be logically placed. So the cable is designed to stretch to twice its normal length. So we need to find the first reference to the cable, and that's here in this sentence right here. It is a means of a hose-like cable, and that hose-like cable is going to introduce this next sentence, the cable. So we're going to put it at point B in paragraph 3, and we're going to move on to the final question of this little passage. So the question asked about the essay as a whole. Suppose the writer's primary goal had been to explain the rate of success of a recent project to protect the North Atlantic right whale population. So I'm going to highlight that as the goal. And I probably want to go to the end and read, when whale calls have been detected, the analysts notify captains of ship in the area. By federal law, these ships must then slow to less than 10 knots, about 12 miles per hour, and post a lookout for 24 hours. Typically, right whales easily move around slow-moving ships. Biologists at WHOI and Cornell are optimistic that having ships reduce speed for the whales will avert tragic collisions. Okay, they're optimistic, but were they successful? I don't know. So that's going to allow us to eliminate the yes answer choices because we don't actually get results. It isn't focused on describing what an auto detection buoy is. But choice C addresses that issue, that this essay is focused on the overview of the project, but not the results. So our correct answer is C, and we move on to the final passage of this practice section. So once more, we're going to consider the grammar of this problem by reading first. Lakota artist Emil Her Many Horses became fascinated by Lakota winter counts. While he was working on an exhibit for the National Museum of the American Indian in 2001, I should recognize that everything after this period is a fragment. So I'm going to select my answer eliminator and eliminate the two answer choices that would not be acceptable because they need to have complete independent clauses on either side. That's going to be the period and the capital and the semicolon. Then we should think, if we remove the while, then I've created two independent clauses because I got Lakota artist Emil Her Many Horses became fascinated by Lakota winter counts. That's an independent clause. He was working on an exhibit for the National Museum of the American Indian in 2001 would create an independent clause. So I need to just have this while follow, and we'll select it as our correct answer. That is the only one that will not have a a dependent clause creating a fragment. So then, or two independent clauses creating a run-on. Moving on to the next question, we've got a test of pronouns. So we need to just consider the antecedent, what is known, the reference for this pronoun of its. Each band or extended family group within the larger tribe kept its own winter count. Well, that's going to be, each band is going to be the its. You gotta be careful with that. Make sure we get the blue. So if we consider our little answer eliminator, its could work. It's not our, that'd be like you and me and we, that's not it. IT apostrophe S is going to be it is. His is not correct either, so our correct answer is indeed no change for this one. We hit next. So then we've got a council of elders will decide which event the year should be remembered for, such as a crucial buffalo hunt, the death of a great chief, or a dramatic meteor shower. Over time, a count would accumulate. There's the verb tense that we can match this yellow highlighted portion to. So we don't want to go straight to a future tense. Would decide matches. Has decided is going to be the incorrect past tense. And is deciding is like this weird present tense that doesn't match. And of course, if we find the proper reference that we have to match in the following sentence, we should be able to get to the correct answer of B here rather readily. We'll hit next. So then remember that you want to consider the correct usage as you look at the next question in a given sentence. A council of elders would decide which event the year should be remembered for, such as a crucial comma buffalo hunt? No, because you don't want to separate crucial and buffalo hunt. We also don't want to separate crucial and buffalo hunt, so that's going to allow us to eliminate A and B. And you should be able to identify these issues as you're going. Then when we consider the next couple of options, we're going to have to separate in the list buffalo hunt from the death of a great chief. So we've got to have the comma at the end. And our correct answer, of course, is going to be C. Even though it's clumsy, you can't fix it your way. You just got to take the best option that's available from the answers. And this time it's choice C. Moving on to the next question. We've got her many horses was inspired to revive the historical practice and creating a new winter count for his own family. Well, this is the verb tense that this yellow highlight has to match, but we can't just delete it because you're not reviving the historical practice and a new winter count. We're going to create a new winter count, and that is going to be a create that matches revive, because was inspired to revive and was inspired to create would be the parallel structure there. And we'll move on to the next question after selecting choice C. Then we've got likewise, he talked about what to his relatives had been important to them in the past year. Well, likewise would mean that it's like a similar situation, and it's not. It's not on the other hand either. It's not instead either. He just did it. So again, in the interest of being as concise as possible, he talked about what to his relatives had been important to them in the past year. Makes the most sense of the options presented. So we'll select D and move on to the next option. Then, which placement for the highlighted text is both logical and also indicates that her many horses had a direct conversation with his relatives. So we need the conversation to be with his relatives. And you probably heard me kind of just hesitate in this sentence. He talked to his relatives. So we need to put that highlighted sentence or highlighted portion of the sentence after talked. So we'll select B and move on to the next question. Then we've got together, and you can see we've got a 5-minute warning that does pop up here, but we'll just kind of ignore that largely. So together, we decided that the first year of their count should be remembered as the year many ceremonies were held at Wakpomni Lake. We didn't do anything, so I'm not part of this, so that's going to be eliminated. It was decided, no, together, and they decided, not he decided, so our correct answer, of course, is going to be the proper pronoun they. Then on to 44, we're being asked to find a transition between the preceding sentence and the following one. So we'll just jump down here. By becoming the family's winter count keeper, her many horses took on the role of historian and storyteller. Thus, a winter count is essentially a tool for remembering. Okay, so we need to find something that says, This person, her many horses, took on the role and then explains what the winter count is. We're not concerned about winter counts by various groups. It's not about paper versus muslin fabric. It's not about another project. It's going to be choice D. The keeper's task is to pass on the oral history that accompanies each winter count. And if you were to read this in that asterisk place, it should make overall coherent sense. Then we go to the next question. Thus, a winter count is essentially a tool. Well, we don't want to have punctuation between essentially and the object, a tool. So our correct answer here is going to be D. We'll then click next. We see history stays alive in the telling as previous keepers must understand each time they looked. So each time they looked, it's not going to be understand. So they must have understood. It is in irregular verb usage. Make sure you read it into the sentence and confirm that it makes overall sense. But history stays alive in the telling as previous keepers must have understood each time they looked at the pictures on their winter count and started to speak. Makes sense to me. We'll move on to the penultimate question here. We're being asked for the main function of the highlighted sentence. Once again, most contextual questions, I'm going to highlight the task. And we've got, it was the year that Walks Far brought back the gray horse with eagle feathers braided into its tail. Well, this is just kind of a example of what would happen if the winter count teller, the winter count keeper, started speaking. So it gives an example of what a keeper might have said based on a winter count. Yeah, that seems like it. And when you're running out of time, you might do a little less of the elimination, but you still want to check everything. It lists the most important events that are depicted on this particular winter count. Absolutely not. It concludes the essay with a summary. It is absolutely not a summary. It describes in detail the pictures. No, we're not focusing on the pictures in one winter count. And we would, of course, select A and move on to our last question about the essay as a whole. And we want to know, did the essay accomplish the goal of writing a brief essay about a historical American tradition that has been revived recently? Well, we did have an essay about winter counts. We've got a little bit of a background on it. And then we talk about how her many horses built their own or his own winter count. So yes, because it explains that most winter counts have been kept up to date by their keepers. Well, the answer is yes, but it's not going to be about most historical winter counts. Yes, because it illustrates how one family has begun to make its own winter count. Absolutely. We don't care, and it does talk about a contemporary one. So again, if we highlight, and I got to make sure I get B selected here, and it does place winter counts into their historical context. It doesn't fail to do so. So once again, we can highlight the reasons. When we hit next one more time, you can see we're at the end. And if I had flagged anything, I can actually click back to the questions at this point and go, okay, well, let me go to, I don't know, question 24. And then I'd go revisit it. You can also hit the review button here. But for now, we'll go ahead and hit end of section. And if you're ready, you can just submit the final answers. And you can see your results. Now, there are no explanations provided at this point, but you can print this thing for reference and go back to the questions by hitting the review button up here.